Thank you, Acting Chair. I commend my colleague in the other place, Mr Anthony Carbines, the Minister for Police and the Minister for Racing, for his remarkable ability in combining portfolios in these areas. This bill is a no-brainer, and I hope to show the House and that they would see me in that light as well. This bill amends the Racing Act of 1958 to provide for offences and penalties for unauthorised access to certain parts of the racecourse and disruptive conduct at Victorian race meetings and official trial meetings. The bill specifically amends the Act to A, prohibit unauthorised access to restricted areas of racecourses during race meetings and official trial meetings. B, prohibit certain disruptive conduct during race meetings and official trial meetings. And C, provide the enforcement of those new offences. There are many reasons, but if the Speaker can indulge me, I want to share some of my personal experiences. I've had the pleasure of attending many race meetings right across our state, whether it's Moonee Valley in the inner north or Seymour in the northern Victoria. I've had the pleasure of attending and enjoying those great events of our fantastic industry puts on. But I want to give an example. I've attended Emirates Stakes Day some years ago, and it was an experience. But a lot of patrons at Flemington that day were inebriated, and dangerously so. This only puts themselves at risk, but it also other patrons at risk. And most importantly, it puts jockeys and horses at risk. That's why we're making these changes. Make no mistake, that is the reason. We must provide an avenue to ensure the safety and welfare of all patrons and participants, including animals, right across Victoria. I have the pleasure of contributing to this debate by placing on record the IER report on the size and scope of the Victorian racing industry. The racing industry in Victoria generates $4.7 billion to the Victorian economy yearly. They help sustain 34,900 full-time equivalent roles for our communities. The inner Melbourne thoroughbred racing generates $1.86 million for the Victorian economy and sustains almost 13,500 full-time equivalent jobs. And in outer Melbourne, thoroughbred racing generates $863 million for the Victorian economy and helps sustain over 6,600 full-time equivalent jobs. And I don't forget the regions. In the Latrobe Valley Gippsland region, thoroughbred racing generates $89.1 million and over 700 full-time equivalent jobs. That's right, Mr Shing, a massive boom for your community. And I'd like to say, the gentleman, my friend and member for Eastern Victoria, Mr McIntosh, how good harness racing is. The Latrobe Valley harness racing generates $7.3 million for the Victorian economy and 56 full-time equivalent roles for the region. And greyhound racing is massive. In fact, the Latrobe Valley industry is the largest industry of all Victorians, sustaining 487 full-time equivalent roles in the region. And how about Warrnambool and the southwest, Ms Macora? Well, I'll let you the opposite know. Greyhound racing contributes $14.5 million for the Victorian economy and helps sustain 114 full-time jobs in the region. And Minister Tierney, it gets better. Thoroughbred racing in your region contributes $78.6 million to the Victorian economy. How good's that? Over 600 full-time jobs, and don't forget harness racing raising $19.1 million and 148 full-time jobs in the economy. I remember my time fondly at the racecourse in Seymour in northern Victoria. I spent a lot of time in this neck of the woods. As a teenager, I know the importance what the racing industry has for the economy, culture and the community of northern Victoria. My parents' farm was in the Goulburn Valley between Yea and Seymour, so we used to frequent the races. So I'm confident that the proud constituents of this region would join me in celebrating the contribution thoroughbred racing makes to the region. Over 500 full-time equivalent jobs. That's $63.2 million economic benefit to the region. But who could be surprised when counting among the many daughters of the region is the legendary black caviar. the winner of countless Group 1 races, undefeated in 25 races. This foal of Nagambie, born of greatness, someone who the legendary football and racing commentator Bruce McAvaney once said, I would say Black Caviar is clearly number one and always will be the best sprinter. So I'm sure the Attorney-General and fantastic representative of the region, Minister Jacqueline Symes, will join me in celebrating the contribution of harness racing that it makes to the region, including $40 million for the Victorian economy and 310 full-time equivalent jobs for the region. And lest we forget the contribution that the greyhound racing makes to the community, $13.9 million and 108 full-time equivalent jobs. It's a big deal. And an area I know well, Geelong. This thoroughbred racing industry in Geelong region generates $90.9 million for the Victorian economy and helps sustain almost 700 full-time equivalent jobs in the region. I'm sure my friends in the other place, the member for Bellarine, Alison Marchmont, and member for Geelong, Christine Cousins, will join me in celebrating this. And how about the greyhound racing industry? That's $30.5 million for the Victorian economy, helping sustain 230 full-time equivalent jobs in the region. And harness racing, I'm sure my friends in the other place, the member for South Barwon, Darren Cheeseman, and member for Lara, Ella George, will join me in celebrating the $12.4 million and 93 full-time equivalent jobs that harness racing contributes to that community. And in my region, in the inner Melbourne, the entire racing industry generates $3.5 billion for the Victorian economy. And that helps contribute to the almost 16,000 full-time equivalent jobs in that local area. The Melbourne Racing Club, or MRC, is based at Caulfield Racecourse in my very own Southern Metro region and operates 3 racecourses, Caulfield, Sandown and Mornington. The Melbourne Racing Club contributes over $460 million to the Victorian economy every year, the major being in my own electorate of Southern Metro. That includes $152 million in direct value added and directly supports nearly 2,000 jobs, including trainers, jockeys, track riders, farriers and stable workers. And the cultural, societal of the entertainment benefits, we can't forget that more than 2 million Victorians attend the MRC venues each year, including 650,000 attendance at non-events, demonstrating the club's ability to engage with people in the local community. The club's activities also generate over $65 million in tax revenue for the government, something I'm sure my friend for the Southern East Metro, David Limerick, would find an issue, but contributes to our big build and ability to do that, to make things matter. What a contribution racing makes to the area, something I'm sure my good colleague in this region, Mr Batchelor, would agree on. So let's talk about unauthorised access to restricted areas. Clause 1 sets out the purpose of the bill and makes it very clear in the opening line that this is what it's all about. What do we mean about unauthorised access? I know all about unauthorised access, having worked in airports for decades, first as a baggage handler, then as a union organiser and union official. Its purpose is to keep people who have the potential or the capacity away from the ability to disrupt aircraft movements and the general safety of airline workers. This isn't just about protecting passengers and aircraft movement, it's about ensuring workers remain safe. Given that there are multiple entries and exits, not just the terminal gates. So I say to those opposite and the crossbench, be very careful with what you vote on this matter. You will be judged on your capacity to stand up for worker security and safety and their rights at work. Equally, the wharf area at ports has the same unauthorised access section. The ports precinct. This is designed to ensure that only the people who work in the area are the only ones in there. This prevents anybody else from entering the site and is designed to ensure the workplace can function properly without dysfunction and ensures worker safety. Let's level the playing field. Given the amount of people who are connected to the thoroughbred harness and greyhound racing, They need to be protected from their work environment, and this amendment will ensure that. Even our own Parliament House, we have a restricted area because we don't want unauthorised people who have the capacity to cause disruption that is not consistent with civilised behaviour. So I say to those in this room who are undecided on this amendment that if you are happy with the protections awarded for you as a parliamentarian, there is no difference, and the hard-working men and women, and don't even forget the working animals who get up every day to contribute to this economy, deserve the same rights and protections at work. In recent years, there have been, unfortunately, repeated incidents of unauthorised access to racetrack area during the running of the horse races at Victorian racecourses. And make no mistake, the potential for damage is unacceptable. It could result in serious injury or death to a spectator, human and animal participants and officials. The reality is, for most Victorian racing industry race meetings, most tickets are sold with a condition of entry. While this can provide an event manager with the ability to remove unruly spectators, it's simply not enough. It doesn't provide a sufficient level of protection. And troublingly, it is not an effective deterrent of dangerous and antisocial behaviour. In fact, civil actions for trespass and nuisance brought by the racing club or anyone else who managed the racetrack can eventually lead to an award of damages, but it is costly, protracted and not always pursued. There are many gaps in the law. The Major Events Act of 2009 includes crowd management, provisions that provide for offences and penalties at events deemed major. But that's only applicable to 8 races. We need to do more. These new statutory offences and penalties will provide a clear, strong and bold deterrent to people who may seek to disrupt or cause harm. These laws will not affect patrons' enjoyment of the day. They can still have a beer, enjoy a yarn, have a party. It changes the areas of the racecourse that you can access, and that's simple. Racegoers are already prohibited from entering restricted areas. The bill will just formalise this in legislation and allow enforcement. Let the record state that these new offences are unauthorised entry into a restricted racing area during a race meeting or official trial meeting without reasonable excuse makes sense. Straightforward, 10 penalty units. During a race meeting or official trial meeting while in a restricted area without reasonable excuse, 60 penalty units. No brainer. Throwing or kicking a projectile within a restricted racing area without reasonable excuse, 20 penalty units. Causing any object to fly into or land within a restricted racing area without reasonable excuse, 20 penalty units. Climbing on a fence, barrier or barricade of a restricted area without reasonable excuse. Just go around to the rock climbing joint. Honestly, if you want to get your energy out, just we get rid of these clowns and make sure that they don't find themselves in these areas. The new offences and penalties are consistent with the offences and penalties that apply to other major sporting events in the Major Events Act. Again, a no-brainer. This won't surprise anyone, but Minister Carbines, as an excellent Minister for Police and Minister for Racing, and his team have been thorough with the community consultation and ensuring all voices are heard. This bill has been through consultation with the Department of Justice and Community, particularly the Justice Policy and the Legislation team, the Police Policy and the Strategic team, and the Fines and Enforcement Services team. We've got consulted Racing Victoria, Harness Racing Victoria and Greyhound Racing Victoria. Let's get it done. Let me clear something up so there's no excuses. I want everyone to hear this. This bill will not prevent protesters at race meetings. I do believe in the right of free assembly and the right to free speech, the right to freedom of association and the right to freedom of expression. How could I not, as a former Secretary of the Branch of the Transport Workers Union? But I also recognise there must be protection for workers in the public. Free expression doesn't mean you have the right to endanger others. Protesters will still be able to get access to open areas in public, engage in protest activity, provided they don't, under any circumstances, engage in any antisocial behaviour or actions that would constitute an offence. So in conclusion, we're going to communicate these new laws to the public. Racing Victoria Greyhound Racing Victoria and Harness Racing. Victoria will work with their respective metropolitan country racing clubs so people know. VicPol will have the primary responsibility for enforcing the laws, but when needed, stewards or chief stewards, some with the experience, skills and know-how, can be appointed as an authorised officer. Thank you.
Time's expired. Thank you very much, Mr Berger. Now call on